Hey guys, I'm Chris Buck, and a very warm welcome to Friday Fretworks. And this week, we're taking a look at a forgotten gem that you could say was a defining sound of the 1970s. Of course, talking about the Mini Humbucker. I think it's probably fair to say that the 1970s aren't exactly considered Gibson's heyday. 1969 saw Gibson purchased by the Norlin Corporation, and the years that followed saw a succession of increasingly less desirable changes to Gibson's lineup, only really improving again once Norlin sold the company in 1986. It's widely thought of as the era of 10, 11 pound, sometimes heavier Les Pauls, three-piece maple necks, pancake bodies, headstock volutes, etc., etc. A marked departure from the construction techniques that typified Gibson's golden era less than a decade before. Interestingly, however, it's also considered to be the era of the Mini Humbucker, which I guess you could say kind of suffered by association with a fairly dark period, not just for Gibson, but for guitar manufacture in general. It's no coincidence that a pre-CBS Fender will set you back considerably more than a comparable guitar made only 5 or 6 years later. And while the image of a Mini Humbucker undoubtedly transports you back to the 1970s, it may surprise you to learn that its design and first implementation actually dates back to a period considered much, much better for Gibson, the late 1950s. So what is a Mini Humbucker, and are we all missing a trick? Now, believe it or not, the Mini Humbucker was first seen in 1959 on the Epiphone Sheraton. Sheraton principally being Epiphone's version of the Gibson ES-335, introduced only a year earlier in 1958. Of course, by this point, Gibson and Epiphone were pretty much one in the same, after CMI, Gibson's parent company, had acquired the Epiphone rights and tooling for the company only a year earlier in 1957. There are actually some sources out there which suggest that they also acquired the design and the technology involved in the Mini Humbucker, but given Seth Lover filed a patent application for his humbucking pickup in June of 1955, it seems more likely that the Mini Humbucker was derived from the design of its bigger brother, the PAF. There are actually some Mini Humbuckers out there in existence with PAF stickers on the bottom of the pickups as well, so this seems infinitely more likely. Couple that with the fact that the Mini Humbucker, as the name suggests, is essentially a humbucking pickup in miniature. Now, to quote Jason Lawler, a man who knows one or two things about pickups, a Mini Humbucker is made like a miniature PAF, has one bar magnet positioned under each coil with adjustable pole pieces made out of a ferrous alloy. The other coil contains a ferrous metal bar that is not adjustable. This corresponds to a PAF with adjustable pole pieces on one coil and a series of metal slugs in the other coil. However, while its construction may be very similar to a PAF, its sound is remarkably different, the reasons for which, unsurprisingly, relate to its size. Again, to quote Jason Lawler, the tone of the Mini Humbucker is also different due to how much iron is in their core. The size of the core and content affects the inductance of the pickup. Inductance has an effect on the output and frequency response. More inductance usually gives more output and more bass. So a smaller pickup, centered in a more focused area of string with a smaller amount of iron content in their core, will result in less output and an overall slightly brighter, clearer sound. Now, of course, there's only so far that describing a sound will take you. So in this next clip, I'm going to be comparing the sound of Mini Humbuckers with the sound of more traditional, full-size PAF-style humbucking pickups in my Panici Gold Top, and purely for the fun of it, comparing it with a set of P90s in my Yamaha Revstar as well. But before we go any further, it is definitely worth touching on the guitar that you will be hearing the Mini Humbuckers in. It is a 1971, at least we think 71, Les Paul Deluxe. Gibson serial numbering was a little bit scattergun around this period, so it's hard to conclusively say. Very kindly on loan from the good folks at Vintage and Rare Guitars in Bath here in the UK. Now, of course, on paper, this is a 1970s Les Paul Deluxe, and as such, comes complete with many of the features that, as I said earlier, are infinitely less desirable in a Les Paul. Wide headstock, pancake body, and of course the headstock volute. In reality, though, it's an absolutely killer guitar, despite its less than desirable specs, and as you're about to find out, many humbuckers certainly have a character all of their own. And that, of course, even though it's become fashionable in recent years to pretty much dismiss out of hand anything Gibson made in this time frame. It's easy to forget just how much incredible music was produced on guitars made in this era, and specifically those equipped with Mini Humbuckers. Johnny Winter, of course, put in an Epiphone Wiltshire equipped with Mini Humbuckers to incredible use in his early career, and the Who's Pete Townshend using any number of Les Paul Deluxes throughout the 1970s. The Kings of Leon Caleb follower, of course, using a Gibson ES325, but undoubtedly the band, or the guitarist most widely associated with the Mini Humbucker, is that of Thin Lizzy. The famed twin guitar attack, Brian Robertson and Scott Gorham, be an incredible example not only of the sound of a Mini Humbucker, but the difference between the Mini Humbucker and that of its bigger brother, the PAF. Stick on Live and Dangerous, and you'll immediately hear that Brian Robertson's guitar, pan to the left, sounds thick and meaty and mid-rangey, very typical of a Les Paul, whereas Scott Gorham's, by comparison, pan to the right, sounds brighter and more articulate and infinitely more clear and more saturated in the top end, very typical of the sound of a Mini Humbucker. Of course, the two then being put together in incredible effect, close enough to work in harmony, quite literally, but each with their own distinct voice that made the sound of Thin Lizzy so unique. In more recent years, Gibson have actually reissued the Les Paul Deluxe in 2021, albeit without some of the more idiosyncratic features of their 1970s counterparts, and generally speaking, seem to have been incredibly well received, which I guess suggests there is a little bit more love for the Mini Humbucker out there than you may have thought. But honestly, spending time with this 1970s Deluxe has been a total revelation. Mini Humbuckers don't sound like any humbuckers that I know, at least to my ear. I guess the obvious comparison, given their form factor, is that of a Firebird pickup, but I'll touch on that in a different video. In terms of their construction, they are very different. But in terms of their sound quality, I guess the obvious comparison that I would probably leap to would be that of a Filtertron, which does make sense to a large degree given the pickup size, very much dictating the frequency range that it does detect. Ultimately, though, I would say that these Mini Humbuckers don't really sound like any other pickup that I own, or in fact that I've ever really played, to be honest, and it's definitely got me thinking whether there's any guitars that I have that may benefit from a set. Turns out, not just a 70s relic, not even a 50s relic. As ever, I'm Chris Buck, thank you very much for watching. Big shout out to Hugh Price and Tone Twins TV for any of the accurate information used in this video. I'm going to play you out now at Vintage and Rare, but as ever, please subscribe, hit the bell icon if you haven't already, and I shall see you next week for another episode. Cheers guys, take care, see you soon.